I'll never forget that day. It feels like it happened just yesterday, even though it's been years. It all started with an argument between my older brother, Jake, and me. Like most of our fights, it was over something trivial, something that now seems ridiculous. He was in a bad mood, and I was being stubborn. We didn't think anything of it. We were brothers. We'd fight, and then we'd make up. But that day was different. Jake was always the protective older brother. He had a way of looking out for me, even when I didn't ask for it. But that evening, he wasn't himself. He left the house looking angry, muttering something about an important meeting in some business of his. I didn't think much of it. I was too caught up in my own issues. I didn't even say goodbye. The next morning, everything changed. A phone call, a brief, cold message. Jake had died in a car accident. A freak accident. No details, just that. To everyone else, it was just another tragic event, but to me, it felt like a punishment. I couldn't shake the guilt. I kept replaying the last conversation we'd had. The words we exchanged, the things left unsaid. I could have apologized. I could have called him back. I could have said something, anything, to make things right. But I didn't. And now it was too late. The family was shattered. My mom couldn't stop crying. My dad barely spoke, and I didn't know how to move on. How could I? I felt like I had failed him. We all did. But life went on. Time passed as it always does, and we started rebuilding ourselves, piece by piece. I went back to school, my parents tried to cope in their own way, and slowly, everything fell back into place, or so I thought. Then one day I found it, the old folder. It had been tucked away in a dusty box in the attic, forgotten for who knows how long. I was up there cleaning out some things when I stumbled across it. At first, I thought it was just old paperwork, bills, work-related documents. But when I opened it, I knew something wasn't right. Inside were strange notes, photographs of Jake meeting with unfamiliar people. These weren't just casual acquaintances. The men in these photos didn't look like anyone Jake ever associated with. And then there were the letters, a pile of them, but one stood out. It was addressed to me. My heart dropped when I read the first line. You will never know the full truth. But you need to understand this. My death was not an accident. And remember, trust no one. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I sat there, frozen, as I processed what I was reading. This wasn't just a letter from my brother. It was a warning. He knew something. Something he couldn't say before he died. Something that would change everything. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The letter haunted me, and the more I thought about it, the more questions piled up. Why would Jake leave me a warning like that? What had he gotten himself involved in? And who could I trust? The words in that letter echoed in my mind every night. Trust no one. It made everything feel like a trap. A trap I couldn't escape. I couldn't let it go. I had to find out what happened to him. Not just for my own peace of mind, but because of the nagging feeling that I was the only one who could uncover the truth. It wasn't just about the accident anymore. It was about something bigger, something darker. I knew it wasn't a coincidence. The first place I started was with the photos. Jake had never mentioned these people, and he certainly never talked about any kind of shady dealings. But there they were, smiling, shaking hands, standing in front of what looked like a run-down warehouse. I had no idea who they were, but something about them felt dangerous. I needed answers. I tracked down the locations on the photos, visited the places he'd been. Each lead took me deeper into a world I wasn't prepared for. I found out that, in the months before his death, Jake had been in contact with some pretty unsavory characters. These weren't just ordinary criminals. They were part of a much larger network. A dangerous web of people with connections that stretched far beyond anything I could have imagined. The deeper I dug, the more I realized how much danger I was in. People started watching me. I would see unfamiliar cars parked near my house, or people just standing on street corners, staring at me when I walked by. At first, I tried to ignore it, but then it became clear someone was keeping tabs on me. I wasn't just investigating my brother's death anymore. I had become part of something much bigger. The fear started creeping in. I didn't know who to trust. My family thought I was being paranoid. My mom begged me to stop digging, to let it go and move on. She couldn't understand why I couldn't just accept the accident. My dad was even worse. He didn't say much, but I could see it in his eyes. The way he looked at me when I mentioned Jake's name. The tension between us grew. It felt like they were hiding something, but I couldn't figure out what. Were they protecting me? Or were they hiding their own dark secrets? I kept pushing forward despite the warnings. I started tracking down the people Jake had been involved with, reaching out to anyone who might have known more about what was going on. It wasn't easy. The more I pushed, the more I realized just how far Jake had gone to bury the truth. The connections were deeper than I could have imagined, and soon I wasn't just fighting for answers. I was fighting for my life. The deeper I dug, the more I realized I was in over my head. The people Jake had been involved with weren't just dangerous. They were connected to things I couldn't even begin to understand. I was getting closer to something, but every step forward felt like I was digging my own grave. One night, after spending hours going over the same documents and notes Jake had left behind, I received a strange call. Unknown number. I hesitated, but curiosity got the best of me, and I answered. The voice on the other end was familiar, but I couldn't place it at first. "William, you need to stop looking into this," the voice said, low and steady. "It's bigger than you think. You don't want to go any further." I felt a chill run down my spine. My heart raced. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice shaky. There was a long pause. Then the voice spoke again, this time with a warning in its tone. "Trust no one, especially not your parents." The line went dead before I could respond. My blood ran cold. I had suspected something was off with my family, but hearing those words confirmed my worst fears. My parents knew more than they were letting on. But why? What were they hiding? I couldn't stop now. I couldn't turn back. I had to know what happened to Jake. I had to know the truth. The next day, I started digging into my parents' finances. I found a number of strange transactions, large sums of money being sent to untraceable accounts. I confronted my dad about it, but he just brushed me off. "It's nothing," he said. "Just old business stuff. You don't need to worry about it." But I couldn't let it go. My brother's death, the strange photos, the cryptic warning. Everything was pointing to one thing: betrayal. My family had been involved in something dark, something I wasn't supposed to know about. I kept pushing. I found more connections, more people linked to Jake's dealings. Some of them were connected to organized crime, others to high-level corruption. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that Jake had been in far deeper than I ever could have imagined. But why hadn't he told me? Why hadn't he warned me sooner? Then the breakthrough came. I tracked down one of the men in the photos, a man named Victor, a known associate of shady businessmen. When I met him, he didn't waste any time. He knew why I was there, and he didn't deny it. He just laughed. "You think you're the only one who's been looking for answers, kid?" Victor said, leaning back in his chair. "Your brother got in too deep. He owed a lot of money to the wrong people. Your family is in the middle of all of this, whether you like it or not." I stared at him, stunned. "What do you mean? Who in my family?" Victor's eyes darkened. "You're asking the wrong questions, William. You're too late. Your brother wasn't the first to die, and he won't be the last. But you're getting too close. If you keep digging, you'll be next." Victor's words lingered in my mind long after our meeting. The idea that my brother wasn't the first to die, that there had been others before him, made my blood run cold. What kind of world had Jake gotten himself into? And how was my family connected to all of this? I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't ignore the danger, no matter how close it was getting. But at the same time, the more I learned, the more I realized just how deep the rabbit hole went. Every question seemed to spawn 10 more, each darker and more unsettling than the last. After meeting Victor, I started to piece things together. My parents, despite their denials, were deeply involved in something shady. I discovered old business deals that I never knew about, all tied to corrupt enterprises, illicit loans, and dangerous people. And it wasn't just the money. It was the secrecy, the lies, the fact that everything had been kept from me, kept from us. The guilt I'd felt about my brother's death began to twist in my chest. I had blamed myself for not reconciling with Jake before he left, for not being there. But now I understood. The truth was that Jake hadn't died because of some random accident. He had died because of a deal gone wrong, a deal that my family had been a part of. I tried talking to my mom again, asking her about the things I had found, the strange bank transfers, the connections to Victor's group. Her face went pale when I mentioned it. For the first time, she didn't try to shut me down. Instead, She just stared at me, almost like she was afraid of something. "William, you need to stop," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are things you don't understand. Your father, he's involved in things that go far beyond what you think. It's too dangerous." But even as she said it, I could see the fear in her eyes. It was a fear that hadn't been there before. And it wasn't for me. It was for herself. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I pressed, feeling a knot form in my stomach. But she shook her head, tears welling up. "I can't protect you from this. You need to leave it alone. Please, just leave it alone." I didn't know what to believe anymore. Was she protecting me? Or was she covering up something worse? I had no way of knowing, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stop now. I kept digging, pushing harder than ever. I tracked down more of Jake's contacts, even found some of the men who had been working with him. They were all terrified of one person, my father. Apparently, my dad had been the one pulling the strings. He'd made deals with dangerous people to cover up his own financial mistakes, dragging my brother into it when things got out of hand. Jake had tried to back out, but by then it was too late. My father's debts had put all of us in danger. And in the end, my brother had paid the price. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that the man I had trusted my whole life, the man who had raised me, had been lying to me all along. My dad was the one who had created this mess. And now I was in the middle of it. I couldn't go back. Not now. Everything I had believed about my family, about my father, was shattered. Each revelation hit harder than the last. The more I learned, the less I recognized the people I had loved. The truth was too ugly to ignore. It wasn't just Jake's death that haunted me anymore. It was everything that had led up to it, everything that had been hidden from us for years. I confronted my dad late one evening, the weight of everything pressing down on me. He was sitting in his study, the room bathed in the dim glow of a desk lamp. The walls were lined with books, old memorabilia, a lifetime of accomplishments. But as I stood there, staring at him, all I could see was the man who had betrayed not just his son, but his entire family. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You knew what was going on with Jake, and you let it happen." His eyes didn't meet mine at first. He stared at his hands, almost as if he was ashamed. When he finally spoke, it wasn't with the anger I expected, but with an unsettling calmness. "It wasn't supposed to end like this, Will," he said quietly. "Jake got involved in something he shouldn't have. He didn't listen. He thought he could fix it, but he couldn't. No one could." I felt the ground shift beneath me. "So you let him die?" "It was never supposed to be like that," he repeated. "I never wanted him to get hurt. But when you owe people like that, you don't have a choice. You can't just walk away. They don't let you." I took a step back, trying to process what he was saying. It was hard to wrap my head around the fact that the man I had called my father was somehow responsible for Jake's death. That he had played a part in dragging Jake into this dangerous world. "I don't believe you," I said, my voice rising. "You killed him. You killed him with your lies and your deals. And now you expect me to just accept that?" My father's face hardened. "You don't know what you're saying, Will. You're not in this world. You don't understand how it works." "Then explain it to me," I shouted. "Tell me how it works. Tell me why you couldn't just tell me the truth. Why you couldn't just protect him like you were supposed to." He stood up suddenly, his face twisted in frustration. "Because it's not that simple. There are things you don't know, things I can't tell you. And now it's too late. They'll come for you next if you keep pushing." For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. It was real. My father, the man who had always seemed invincible to me, was terrified. And for a moment, I realized he wasn't just trying to protect himself. He was trying to protect me. But it was too late for that. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady now, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "I can't be a part of this anymore. I'm done being a pawn in your games." And just like that, the facade of our family, the one I had held onto for so long, came crumbling down. I couldn't stay. Not with him. Not with the lies, the secrets, the betrayal. I had to leave, or I'd be caught in the same trap Jake had been. I spent the next few days trying to process everything. The anger I felt was overwhelming, but so was the pain. My family had been a lie. My brother's death had been a lie. Everything had been manipulated for years. and I was just now waking up to the reality of it all. But even as I fought to make sense of everything, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more, that I hadn't uncovered everything. There was something lingering in the shadows, something that still didn't add up. Then, I received a final piece of the puzzle. It came in the form of another letter. This time, it wasn't from Jake, but from someone else, a person I never expected. It was from my mother. The letter was brief, but it explained everything. She confessed that my father had made a deal years ago, a deal with people who had a lot of power and even more influence. They had put him in debt, and in order to get out, he had to make sacrifices. Jake had been one of those sacrifices. My mother had known, but she had kept silent, afraid of the consequences. She had hoped that I would never find out, that I would never have to know the truth. The final blow came when I read the last lines of her letter. Your father made a deal with them, Will. And Jake's death wasn't just an accident. It was part of the price. I stood there, stunned, as the weight of the words sank in. The truth was more horrific than anything I had imagined. My family hadn't just let Jake die. They had sold him out, all to cover up their own mistakes. I couldn't stay. I couldn't live in a house built on lies, surrounded by people who had betrayed me in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. I left that night, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a mind full of shattered memories. The road ahead wasn't easy. I moved far away, cut off from my family, from everything I had known. The guilt still lingered, the shadows of the past following me everywhere. But I knew I had made the right choice. The truth had freed me from the lies, even if it meant losing everything. I still think about Jake every day. I still mourn the brother I lost, the man who was taken from me by the very people who should have protected him. But in the end, I've learned one thing. Trust is a luxury that my family will never have again. And that's something I can never get back. But I'm free now. And for the first time in a long time, I'm starting to understand what it means to live with the truth.
If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I'd really appreciate it if you took a moment to click that button. I put a lot of effort into searching through Reddit so you can enjoy the stories I've found just for you. You already know what to do. Comment what you think about this story. I'll respond to you. See you in the next video.